Armen and Levack, 104.5 The Team, 104.5theteam.com. Joining us now is Marc Edelman, legal expert for Forbes Sports and a professor at City University of New York, Baruch College as well. And Marc, we're trying to figure out, yesterday the 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals upheld a lower court's ruling in the Ed O'Bannon case that the NCAA violated antitrust laws by limiting student-athlete compensation. But they also ruled against a plan to pay student athletes as much as $5,000 annually. Marc, can you try to put into layman terms and explain to us,
please,
what happened? What happened yesterday?
Okay, trying to break it down for the rest of us here.
Yeah.
First, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals held that the NCAA is not above the law. The NCAA is subject to antitrust laws, just like all other businesses are subject to them, and the NCAA's behavior has to be looked at under what's known as the rule of reason under antitrust. Now, that much is a good thing. Most courts had already recognized as much, but it totally negated the NCAA view that they had an exemption. That's the first piece. The second piece, however, is that antitrust law is primarily about protecting consumers and consumer choice. So to establish a violation under antitrust law, one has to show that consumers are harmed. In its defense, the NCAA put together a study, and I think it was a terribly conducted study that used loose language, but it came back and it purportedly said that fans are less likely to watch college sports if the athletes are paid. Now, the plaintiffs should have put together a study to show just the opposite. They should have introduced evidence that would show that fans would be just as interested in college sports if the athletes were paid, and perhaps more interested if money could lead to their favorite players ending up on their team. But for reasons that confound me and perhaps everybody else in the legal community, the plaintiffs' lawyers did not go ahead and put together that study. And without that study, the court came back and said that there was not sufficient evidence that the NCAA's restraints of trade harmed competition more than it helped it. And for those reasons, the free market to allow college athletes to get up to $5,000 per year ultimately failed.
So the kids won, but they don't get any money.
Well, the only people right now that are running around saying the kids won were the plaintiff's lawyers. I don't think it's right to say the kids won. I mean, the big victory here was that it wasn't a loss. The big gain here was that the court did not come back and say the NCAA is exempt from antitrust laws altogether. But the NCAA, in two unusual circuits, the third and the ninth, were the only ones that ever said this. This is good because it doesn't preclude future lawsuits against the NCAA on similar grounds. And there's another one right behind O'Bannon, Jenkins versus the NCAA, where the league counselor is Jeffrey Kessler, who's represented NBA players and NFL players for more than 25 years, who is now going to try to achieve what the plaintiffs' lawyers in O'Bannon failed to do, which is to get a free market under antitrust law for college athletes. But it's going to be a period of time, and they're now going to have to do what the plaintiffs' lawyers in O'Bannon didn't. They are going to need the consumer study to show fan interest will remain high if the athletes are paid.
Marc Edelman, Forbes Sports legal expert with Armen and Levack, 104.5 The Team, a professor at City University of New York, Baruch College as well. All right, Marc, eventually, long-term, are student athletes going to get paid? I mean, they get the stipend now, but long-term, do you see a future where they're going to keep fighting it, and they're going to be getting salaries essentially from universities?
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at college athletics, this is the revenue cow of many of the big public and private universities. There is money to go around. Right now, the money is given to college football and basketball coaches in salaries of $5 to $7 million. If you look at the University of Oregon, they can't pay the athletes, so instead Nike goes in and builds a locker room which is more luxurious for the college football players than pro athletes have. The reality is the market is already there. All that needs to happen is a breakaway at the collusion where every college says, if you don't, we don't. And ultimately, I believe antitrust law will achieve it. This case did not. The plaintiff's lawyers in this case didn't handle it perfectly, but sooner or later, in some court, it will change.
Well, Mark, while I've got you here, I got to ask you about the other big debate on the show. Leonard Fournette, he's the running back for LSU that everyone's starting to talk about. He's only a sophomore. Looks like he could play in the NFL now. Should players like Fournette be able to get in the NFL faster than 3 years in? And do you see a scenario where that might happen?
Absolutely. You know, a rule by a league that says that all the teams agree not to sign a player that's less than X years removed would be a violation of antitrust law, if not for the fact that the players' associations agree to it and make it an issue under labor law. The main way to have this change would be the day that the Players Association says that we represent not only the players in the league, but those that want to enter. This rule serves no purpose, and we are not going to agree to it in the next round of collective bargaining. The other alternative would be for a player of this nature to either try to bring an antitrust suit, arguing that the union does not represent them, or to bring a breach of the duty of fair representation suit against the union if the union does represent them but has not protected their interests. So if it's that important to this player, we could see another Maurice Clarett-type lawsuit in the not-too-distant future.
Why would this outcome be different than Maurice Clarett's?
For many reasons. First, Maurice Clarett, and this was another fundamental error, Maurice Clarett brought his lawsuit in the Second Circuit, which is where New York is based. And the antitrust standard, where there's a union in place, grants a very broad exemption. If this same case were brought in, say, the District of Minnesota, there might be a greater likelihood of success. Or even if the case were brought in the very same court, Sonia Sotomayor, who then was on the Second Circuit and ruled against Maurice Clarett, in her ruling, she said that if it was a breach of anything, it would be the union's duty of fair representation, which might almost be a sliver of openness to create a different avenue in which to challenge the rule.
Interesting stuff. Marc Edelman, legal expert for Forbes Sports with Armen and Levack on 104.5 The Team. Mark, your take on Deflategate and this continuing to get pushed back, and now February, the next time this will go to court.
Well, Deflategate, some people talk about Tom Brady and deflated football. To me, that's boring, albeit it might matter if you're a fantasy team or if you're a fan of the Patriots. To me, what Deflategate really is about is the NFL Commissioner's Office and a deflated discipline process which failed because the NFL failed to follow its own rules. The NFL had a dream scenario. They got the Players Association to cave to rules that would make all dispute resolution in football subject to review for Roger Goodell. They got to put their own person in as neutral arbitrators. And that means Goodell's decisions will get broad deference. They're upheld unless they're found arbitrary or capricious or don't bear their essence to the bargaining agreement. And even with that pot of gold that the NFL is able to negotiate for itself, time after time after time after time again, Bountygate to Peterson to Rice and now to Tom Brady, 4 different finders of fact ultimately found that Roger Goodell and the people working for Roger Goodell lacked even the ability to implement their own rules the way the NFL wrote their very own rules. And that's why they keep getting overturned, and I don't think Brady's getting reversed.
All right, Marc Edelman, legal expert for Forbes Sports. All right, Mark, so you're also the professor at City University of New York, Baruch College. You teach the only course in the country on fantasy sports law. What is fantasy sports law?
Well, this semester at Baruch, we've retitled the class Online Gaming Contests and Sweepstakes, but we do spend 6 weeks on fantasy sports. We go into all of the legal issues entailing fantasy sports, particularly from the gaming law standpoint. We discuss whether daily games is illegal, the differences in state law, the differences in federal law. When I teach an entire course on fantasy sports, we get into trademark rights, we get into intellectual property rights. Can you use the names of college athletes in the college fantasy game without their permission? And the incredible thing about this class is more than half of them in the room actually think that if the daily fantasy sports marketplace continues to expand, it's a market in which they would like to work.
In your projection, is it going to continue to expand?
You know, there's one company out there that's doing everything they can to destroy the market. Right now, I think the legality of daily fantasy sports varies state by state, format by format. and one of the two very large players is playing free and loose with the rule by doing things such as creating one tournament fantasy golf when federal law says multiple events, and continuing to push the envelope. They've invited a lot closer review. I think ultimately we'll end up in a world where we have traditional sports gambling and everything will be legal. But as long as companies don't toe the line, we're going to see a lot of state and federal investigations and perhaps changes in the law in years to come.
Marc Edelman, professor, interesting stuff, professor at City University of New York, Baruch College, and also the legal expert for Forbes Sports. He's on Twitter at Marc Edelman. That's Marc with a C, at Marc Edelman on Twitter. Marc, enjoyed the conversation, and don't be surprised if we bug you again in the future, if that's okay.
Love your show. It's always my pleasure.